So the next model that we're going to look at was developed by William Isaacs, who is one of the central figures in this field of working with dialogue in organizations. And this model is built on Cantor's 4-player model. And so it is a model that illustrates 4 different practices that can help you develop the capacity for delivering the 4 different speech acts in Cantor's model. So the first practice is the practice of voicing. If you want to get better at making moves, it's good to practice voicing. And for each of these speech acts, there are many practices that you can engage in, but I'm going to give you one practice that is very good for each of these speech acts. And the voicing, one way that you can practice voicing is to, when you have a conversation, then sometimes there will be something that nobody talks about, but you kind of think it is important. So sometimes it will be like the elephant in the room, or something. Many times if there's something that you think is important but nobody's mentioning it, nobody else seems to think that it's important, then you might think, oh, it's just me. And the practice of voicing is to say, let me say it anyway. So it's kind of like you look through all the things that you will normally keep to yourself, and then you will say, is there any of these private thoughts or feelings that I think would actually be good to make explicit in the conversation? So one example to illustrate this was, it's a colleague of mine who worked with a management team. She was facilitating a 2-day workshop with them. And it was going fine, and they had like a lot of different conversations. And afternoon of the second day, one of the most junior members of the management team said, actually, over the past 1.5 days, we have had the same conversation that we have on every single team development event for the past 5 years. And then there was quite a lot of silence in the room, and then that completely changed the conversation. So it was really important to voice that, right? To say this. Good. So I think thinking about, if you perceive there's an elephant in the room, or if there's something that you keep private but you actually think it's important, it's worth considering, is this something that you should give a voice to? Now, I'm not suggesting that you should just blurt out everything that's in your mind. Sometimes that's not useful, but maybe you can take that step and say, maybe there are certain things that I'm keeping private that actually would be really beneficial to make explicit. So that's the practice of voicing. Then there's the practice of listening. So to get better at making the speech acts of follow, you can practice listening. And this is because if you don't listen to other people, it's very difficult to build on their ideas. You have to listen quite intensively and be receptive for what other people are saying in order to be able to build on it. And this might sound obvious, but it is much more difficult than one might think. Many times when other people are talking, especially if somebody is talking and we don't agree with them, we're not really listening to what they're saying. We're just listening for how we can come in and say our own thing. So sometimes somebody is saying something and we just interrupt them and speak very quickly. Or if they're delivering an argument that we disagree with, we are listening specifically for all the flaws in the argument that we can use to launch our own points from. Instead of listening for what is actually valid or interesting, or what you could build on in what the other person is saying. I think the simplest and easiest way to practice listening is just to stay quiet for longer. If you tend not to stay quiet for more than 5 seconds, stay quiet and let somebody else talk for a minute, for 2 minutes, for 3 minutes without interrupting them and without minimizing your feedback even. Sometimes, even if we don't communicate with words, we communicate a lot with our face. And somebody says something and you go, right, that says a lot. Then you've already expressed your opinion. Or if you go like, that also expresses your opinion. Sometimes it can be very nice to just relax and let another person speak. Many times what happens is somebody starts saying something and you go like, I know where this is going. I know what the next thing they're going to say is. I have already understood them. But then if you stay quiet for maybe 2-3 minutes, then the other person starts saying things that surprises you. And you think, that's actually not what I thought they were going to say. And now you're engaged in listening. So a very easy way of practicing listening, if that is if you want to be better at following, if that's the speech act that you want to be better at, then practice listening. And a concrete way of practicing listening is just say less, stay quiet for longer. Good. Then there is, if you want to get better at opposing, then William Isaacs suggests that you should practice respecting. And this is because to make an effective oppose, you have to be very respectful of the other person. So by respecting, he doesn't mean go easy on them. He doesn't mean, let them have their opinion if you think the opinion is wrong. But he means don't attack them as a human being, right? Engage in a good, well thought out, constructive dialogue around their opinion, but avoid using something like sarcasm or put downs or these kind of things, which are more disrespectful ways of talking. Because even if you're right, if you oppose somebody and the oppose doesn't come with respect, the other person's ears are just going to close, and you won't have. Then now you're going to be in one of these entrenchment wars where you're just basically trying to convince the other person about your point of view, and it's profoundly boring. So, Isaacs talk about respecting as consisting of 2 interlinked dimensions. The first one is remind yourself that if somebody has an opinion, there is something in it. I have never come across anybody expressing an opinion where there wasn't some nugget of gold in there. There wasn't some. It may be not fully formulated. It may be very poorly formulated. It may be full of flaws. But there is something motivating the person to speak, and it's worth listening for that. And if you can get that and summarize and give the person you're talking to, especially when you disagree with them, if you can give their point of view a formulation or an expression that is even stronger and more persuasive that they can give themselves, now they want to talk to you. Now they want to listen to you because they want to hear your reservations. They want to hear your objections because they know that you get them. I have a story that I think illustrates this very well. At some point I was out working with an organization. This organization, the purpose of the organization was to go out into elementary schools and engage teachers and parents and kids in talks about alcohol consumption. And they said their purpose was to create dialogue around alcohol consumption so that people there could be more aligned with each other and have agree on certain rules for alcohol consumption. However, they also had another purpose, and that was there's a lot of research showing that the later kids start drinking alcohol, if you can push it so that kids start drinking alcohol later in life, it's going to solve a whole host of problems. And so that is also their agenda, to present this kind of research and let that be part of the data that people use to make decisions about policies for alcohol consumptions in the individual classes and schools and so on. And they were very frustrated because they said every now and then when they're out talking to parents, there is one parent who will say something along the lines of, I started drinking alcohol when I was 6 and it never did me any harm. And anyway, there is this one person in class and her parents are the strictest and she's the one that drinks the most. So it doesn't work to put down rules anyway. The kids just have to figure it out for themselves. And by the way, I don't believe the research. So they were very frustrated because they say, well, the research is clear and it's substantial. And so just not believing the research, that's a problem. And what they are saying is just plain and simple wrong. So how do you have a conversation with somebody like that? And here respecting can be very good because you can say, okay, there's a reason why they're saying what they're saying, even though what they're saying sounds crazy or incoherent or false. They are trying to express something important. And when we talked about it, it became clear that, especially the anecdote, they say these parents are very strict with their kid and their kid completely ignores what they're saying. I think that reveals what their concern was. It reveals that they say, okay, it's all good and well to put down rules for your kids, but you have to also be mindful to not disrupt the relationship. Because if you disrupt the relationship, the kids are just not going to care about the rule. And that's actually a very fair point and something that should be included in the discussion. So rather than just asking the question, what kind of rules should we agree on relating to alcohol, we must ask the question, what kind of rules should we agree on and how should they be enforced in a way that preserve the parent-child relationship? So I think this is a good example because it reveals that somebody, even when somebody says something that might appear outlandish to you or completely wrong to you, before you oppose them, it's really good to really understand what are they trying to express. Many times I have worked with managers who say, oh, my employees say this or that or the other, but that's just because they don't have the overview I have, right? They just dismiss it instead of saying, what is it actually that leads my employees or colleagues in other departments to say what they say? And when you have that aha moment, like, oh, this is the nugget of gold that's in there. Now you can take that nugget of gold and say, I really appreciate this bit and I have some concerns so I think the way you go about it is problematic for these reasons, and now you can have an actual dialogue. So knowing that there is a reason why people say what they say, even when it sounds really strange to you, that is part of respecting. And the other part of respecting is knowing that you can never fully understand another person's perspective because you're not them. So in order to understand another person's perspective, you have to listen a lot. And there is always going to be something that you're not getting. And that kind of humility in how you oppose someone also makes you very effective at opposing in ways that creates productive dialogue. So that was respecting. The last one is, if you want to get better at bystanding, then you should practice suspending. And suspending, briefly said, is to notice what your assumptions are and then suspend those assumptions. And sometimes it's good to be able to know what those assumptions are and treat them as such. And this relates to what we were talking about, why it's important when you're creating a business plan. It's so important to know what in that business plan is facts and what are assumptions, because assumptions might need to be suspended or tested through hypothesis testing. But if you confuse them with facts, then you won't do that because you'll feel that's just how it is. So sometimes it can be good to look at your picture of the world, what you believe about the world, and really ask yourself, or as a group, what you believe about the world, and really ask yourself, what are the assumptions that we tacitly agree on? And sometimes the assumptions won't even be on the business plan because we just all tacitly assume it, and it feels so obvious to us that we don't put those assumptions on the business plan. So the capacity to say, what is it that we tacitly assume that makes the market or the business or the value proposition look like it looks to us? And then if you can put words to those assumptions and then say, well, are we sure about these assumptions? That's a very powerful way of practicing suspending. Good. So let's do an exercise around this. Take a couple of minutes in your groups and think about what is the speech act you want to practice, and then how can you use the practices of listening, voicing, respecting, and suspending to practice that particular speech act, and really be concrete. Use these practices to decide on some concrete actions that you're going to do throughout the rest of the course to practice those speech acts. So if, for example, if you want to practice voicing, maybe you can say, I'm going to, throughout the course, I'm going to set off 5 minutes every week to just journal and around saying, what is it that I feel is important but I haven't said, and then have a personal reflection on what would be a good way of bringing that in. Should I bring it into the conversation? And if yes, how would I do it? So say every week I'm going to reflect on that. Or if you want to practice, if you say I want to be better at taking perspective, I want to be better at doing bystanding, then you have to practice suspending, and you can say every week I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a reflection on what are my taken for granted assumptions. What is the group's taken for granted assumptions? You might also say, who can I present our plan to who might have such an outside perspective that they can spot our taken for granted assumptions? Maybe somebody who is not studying business, right? They might ask exactly the right questions. So take some time and in your groups and find out how you are going to practice the speech act that you are least comfortable with, using these practices of voicing, listening, respecting, and suspending, and be very concrete.